Hi, I'm Richard Haynes at Eurobrick, and I'm going to talk today about using our Europoint mortar, which is a pre-bagged sand and cement mortar specially formulated by Eurobrick, suitable for pointing brick slips, stonework and repointing old brickwork. In this video we're going to show you how to mix and apply the mortar and finish the pointing joints. So this small wall is the Eurobrick training wall where people come to do training courses and learn how to put the system together. This particular installation, brick joints are fairly consistent 10mm beds and perps, so we need to think about keeping the brickwork as clean as we can by keeping the accurate placing of the mortar into the joints. That's something I'll come to later. So before we start mixing, we need some useful things around the place. A couple of gorilla buckets, nice flexible plastic gorilla buckets which are easy to clean. We've got this one half full of water, which is going to be our top-up bucket and for cleaning tools. And in this one we've got 40 ml of water or so at the bottom of the bucket, which is going to be our mixing water. A scoop, this is an aluminium scoop that we can supply or you can get, but any plastic scoop. We're going to be applying the mortar with a pointing bag and tip, so I'll show you how that works in a moment. We're also going to need something to mix the mortar with, and we're using a 110 volt paddle mixer on a 110 volt transformer. We're going to start mixing the powder into the water. There are instructions on the bag that give you an indication of what amount of water you should put with a given amount of powder, but it's more important to get used to what the material should look and feel like in the bucket. Consistency's not quite right, so we're going to add some more powder. So, as I was saying, we're looking for body and consistency, and you can see it's just starting to peak a little bit. So when you get close to the consistency of the mixture being right, a little bit of powder can make quite a difference. And if you add a bit of powder and it goes too stiff, you can always soften it up again by palming some clean water from your other bucket into the mix and giving it another stir. But I'm going to see if this one's going to work, because I think this looks like it's getting close to a perfect consistency. And before we do that, we need to prepare the pointing bag to make it optimum for use. We make a few subtle modifications. Firstly, we take about 40 ml off the end of the bag by cutting it across. Then we take the metal tip and that gets pushed into the bag. Another little tip that we've learned over the years is that where the nozzle is round, possibly slightly too big for narrow brick joints. So what we do is we give the nozzle a tap with a hammer to make it more of an oval shape. That way we've got a thick and a thin version of the pointing tip to accommodate different joint sizes. And before we put the mortar in the bag, I'm just going to use some tape to secure the tip into the bag so that when we're working it's not being pushed back into the bag as it touches the brickwork. So here we are, we've got our mixture in the bucket, which we hope is the right consistency. And as I said, the ideal test is to put some in the bag and see what it looks like. So what I'm looking for at this stage is for the mortar to be plopping out at the end of the bag, not in a continuous stream, to get it to a consistency that lets you apply the mortar to the joints without squirting it all over the place and it being too runny, and at the same time it not being too hard work to get it out of the bag. When we're applying the mortar, basically we need to keep the bag in a nice firm cone shape, and we do that by maintaining the twist at the end of the bag and then alternating between squeezing the bag a bit and twisting the bag a bit. One thing you should note is I've put a bit of old board down here just to catch any muck that either falls from the bag, falls from the wall, and certainly falls to the floor when we actually strike the joints at the end of the process. So the idea is that we fill the joints to just overflowing, because when we strike the joints we're going to push that mortar right in to pack it in safely. In places like this, where I haven't quite filled the joint, I need to go over those again. It's easier to do it now than to go back and fill holes later. So I'm just squeezing the bag a little bit, kind of squeezing and twisting at the same time to keep that shape and a consistent flow of mortar out of the bag. Just make sure you don't miss any joints. You know, joint sizes vary, it's inherent in brickwork. So that little trick we did with the nozzle to make it thin or thick, that's quite helpful. There are some thicker joints coming up just down here where they're a bit wider compared to these which are a bit thinner. So in that situation, we can turn the nozzle through 90 degrees. We're only doing a tiny area today for demonstration purposes, but if you're doing a whole wall, you need to try and complete areas on the same day. You know, do a whole elevation if you can, because one of the issues with all cement products is that different drying conditions will mean that the mortar cures at a different speed and you might get a disparity between the colour or tone of the mortar. So once you get going, you can cover quite a lot of work quite quickly. However, because the mortar is high in cement and polymer type additives, it will stain the brickwork. So best of all, don't go too quickly, because whatever time you think you're making up by pointing quickly, you could easily lose some time spent cleaning down the brickwork. So one thing we need to keep doing is coming back to where we started to see how far along the curing of the mortar is. What we're trying to do is catch it when it's like thumb dry. You can put a print in it, but it doesn't stick to your fingers. And at that point, it's perfect for tooling. Get a nice clean cut on the edges. As it is now, it's still a little bit too soft. So we don't want to go at it too soon, because that spoils the finish as well. When we're working with the mortar, if we get it on the face of the bricks, it's tempting to start messing about with it, but it's better to leave it so it's partly cured and then flick it off as a lump. If you start trying to get it off when it's too wet, you make more mess than you are trying to fix. Okay, we've waited a little while for it to cure off to a point where we can tool it, and hopefully it's at about the right spot now. So all we do, you can use the heel of the tool or the tip, but you just need to run it through the mortar. And as you can see, it cuts nicely on the edge of the brick and gives you a reasonably nice finish. We always work away from edges so that we don't push the mortar out. And we also need to make sure we finish our corners. Now, I just said we work away from edges, but because this little window reveal is quite shallow, I'm going to have to work in the opposite direction. So I'm just putting my finger on the end, bring it to a point, and then work down this side. Once you've started tooling, if you look there, I didn't put enough mortar in, so I need to go back and attend to that. And the best material to use for that is what's on the floor on our catching board, because that is broadly the same condition as this. We don't want to go in with new wet mortar. We want to use material that's at the same stage of cure, so it's nice and consistent. But as we work down the wall, we might catch up with mortar that's still too wet, so you need to judge that. And if you get to a point where it's starting to tear up on the surface when you drag the tool through it, leaving lots of little hairline cracks, it's probably too wet. Another problem with tooling it too wet is that you'll force salt solutions to the surface of the mortar, leaving like a white stain on the face, which you don't want. So it's important to get the tooling done at the right time. Also, it's very easy to miss the perp joints, the vertical joints, when you're doing this. So you need to keep looking at where you've been and make sure that you haven't missed a joint that will later cure and be too hard to do anything with. When we've struck the joints, we'll have little edges and burrs, or snots as they're known, on the edges of some of the mortar joints. And the bigger ones we can knock off with the corner of the trowel or the pointing tool, but it's important not to smear them onto the faces of the bricks. So the best treatment is to brush it off once it's finished. We can't do that yet because it's still too wet and the brush marks would appear in the face of the mortar. So we'll give it a few minutes to go off a bit more and then we'll come back and put a brush over it. So another thing that people always ask is, how long do I have to leave the mortar before I can tool it off? And that's a very flexible and elastic bit of time right there. It depends on how warm it is, how much wind there is if you're working outside, how humid the conditions are, and also what kind of bricks are you pointing. So the ones we've been using today are fairly absorbent, but probably about middle of the range. If you were working with a Staffordshire Blue engineering type brick slip, they're really dense and it takes a long time for them to suck the water out of the mortar. So on a cold day, you could be waiting a long time for these to go off. On the other hand, you might be working on a warm, breezy day with something like these London stock slips. These are much more absorbent, and a combination of warm weather and the absorbency of these bricks means that you're going to have to go back a lot sooner and keep checking that you're not leaving it too long before you start striking the joints. So after we've tickled up the edges, knocked off any bigger snots and given it a brush, it should be pretty much finished. Always brush 45 degrees across the face of the work, not too vertical or horizontal. Also need to talk about temperature range of work. As with all sand and cement products, you need to be working in temperatures of 4 degrees and rising, so look at the weather forecast. Also, don't start pointing too late in the day because you've got to finish striking it, and if you leave it too late in the day, especially in the winter time, there's every possibility that by the end of your shift there'll still be wet mortar in the wall that you can't tool off. Conversely, you may be working in hot conditions. It may be hot and the bricks may be sucking the water out too quickly, and you can mitigate that by spray misting the bricks with a garden sprayer full of water, just to wet the bricks to slow down that process of absorption. When you finish the work, again, especially in the winter time, you need to protect that work from the ravages of frost and rain while it's curing. You know, a heavy rainstorm will wash the mortar out and frost will attack the mortar and cause cracks to appear. So in the winter time, you need to make provision to cover the work while it's finishing off. At the end of the job, this is the worst bit. Don't forget to clean down your tools, buckets, pointing bags. These can be reused a number of times if you keep washing them and standing them up to dry. So that's the end of our little demonstration. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions or need some advice, want to discuss the materials, call the office. We'll help you as much as we can. Thanks very much for watching.